From the Cyber Hub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the Cyber Hub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Well, what's up, security gang? Welcome to another episode of the Cyber Hub podcast. It's a Friday conversation special. I'm joined by one of my favorite industry voices because he talks about a topic I'm so passionate about, identity. Jeff Rich. He's the executive director at Identity Defined Security Alliance. Jeff, welcome to the show.
James, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
I said your last name right, correct?
Yes, you did. The
Okay.
E is silent. It's the only part of me that is.
I love it. That's such a good kickoff for this Friday morning show. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. Jeff, it's great to have you here. You know, we're talking about identity today, and that's what the next 30 minutes are going to be focused on, y'all. And so, you know, you really want to tune in. But let's start off by people who haven't heard about what Identity Defined Security Alliance is. Kind of, what is it? Why'd you start it? Or were you one of the starters? And what made you kind of jump on board with this security alliance?
Well, the Identity Defined Security Alliance is a nonprofit, and it's comprised of identity and security vendors, along with any other corporation or individual that wants to join and really drive the identity-centric model towards the security of identities and identity security. And that just touches so many areas that I know we're going to get into today. But that's really the sum of it. We're a nonprofit. We have research. We provide some education. We produce white papers, blogs, webinars. So we like to, and almost all of that is free because we're a nonprofit. So we really like to drive the security of identity forward, and that's with everyone on board.
Yes, you know, it's so funny to see identity start to get, I think, a little bit more of the respect it deserves, per se, right? For so often we were focused on devices and endpoints, but we've rather forgotten, you know, our ability to look at an identity, whether it be human or non-human, was always related to that. And so now to see identity kind of really take a front and center approach is unbelievable. You know, you and I were talking right before the show started, and I've always said identity is the new endpoint, and you go, well, identity is the new perimeter. So kind of help define what you mean by identity is the new perimeter.
Happy to. So I've been in this space for, let's just say 5 decades, and we'll go with that, all right? I've been doing it a while, and actually, if you go back to when I started, a lot of it was called data security at the time, was identifying, giving people user IDs, resetting their passwords, and then giving them access to things, usually files. So to a degree, it's kind of come full circle, but at a much higher level, because back then when I started, the perimeter were the edges of the mainframe computer. And then once you had a little more and there was more disk space, the perimeter became the walls of the data center. And then when internal networking happened, the perimeter became the walls of all of the facilities and buildings that a company or an organization had. Then the internet happened, and the perimeter became the world, essentially, which means it was tough to define. And now, if you look at anything you do, you can't get anything done without saying who you are, right, at a minimum, which means that the perimeter now is, or where people want to breach is your identity, you. Once your identity is compromised, your adversary gets access to a whole bunch of stuff you don't want them into.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why we see these attacks on LastPass or OnePass, Okta, and so many others that are really kind of defined identity solutions as being at the front. And again, they're victims of a crime, so we're not trying to shame them here, and that's not something we do on the podcast, right? But it's essentially, when you look at the focus of our adversaries, you're seeing their focus really switch to these identity providers that are supposed to kind of provide that, you know, defense in depth security on people's identities.
Well, I want to maybe offer one slight tweak on that, because I'm not here to chastise anyone for what did or didn't happen either. My career hasn't been perfect, so
no one is. You can't be in security with a perfect career, and if you have, you've jumped ship too many times. You've never been in the battled waters,
right? Or you've only been doing it for 3 months. Those are the only two options. But I don't think anyone really offers a, hey, here's a complete defense in depth. Use us and you'll never have a compromise. No vendor is going to say that because they are run by people. They have software that were written by people and they're on systems operated by people. So even if the software were perfect, which it never is, there are still people involved. And no matter how good you are, no matter who you are, you are either going to forget something or just have a bad day, and or just one slip up. All it takes is 10 seconds, and that could happen to be the opportunity for someone to say, "Oh, I'm going to take advantage of that and exploit it." So there is no perfect defense. However, the advantage to defense in depth is when one of those defenses slips, you should have another one ready to catch it. And I've always said in incident response, you should always prevent everything you can, but boy, be ready to respond to everything else. And that everything else is a larger sphere.
It typically always is, because that entry point is it varies, right? It can be someone's identity and credentials, which we've obviously seen recently be the main entrance and a way to escalate privileges within an organization, right? Let me target someone who's got access to something in order to get there, which is again identity related. It can be vulnerability related, right? So one big one this week is Citrix bleed, right? We saw it's wreaking havoc in Australia, kind of essentially halting their supply chain, but by hitting the largest port and container yard in Australia, right? Well, that's coming from a vulnerability, and we're seeing a whole bunch of those continue to kind of continue there. And it's almost like, when you look at ransomware, people go, "Oh, how'd they get in?" Well, one of two ways: they either got in through identity or they got in through a vulnerability. And if you look at the CIS top 20, those two tend to be in the top 10, right? Patch your stuff, secure your identities, and then improve your identity based solution. It's not just enough to do MFA. Let's just say that.
Yeah. By the way, when's the last time you heard someone say, "Oh, you need strong passwords"? Yeah, you kind of do, but boy, are we past that.
I think we're past passwords.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we're past passwords. I think we have to be more intricate in the way we look at identity. I've been a firm believer that you've got to go beyond passwords, and you've got to do essentially a not just an MFA, but a lot of different MFAs based on different access points you're giving people, and you should constantly be validating that person's identity throughout. And I mean that by zero trust. A lot of times, what I think a very common mistake, by the way, is someone logs in once and they can stay logged in for 30, 40 days.
Mm.
That's I think that's an identity risk that you take on. That's you should make people log in multiple times a day sometimes, depending on the access they have.
That risk expands exponentially the longer you stay in.
Right. Well, especially if your people are compromised, and how many people actually run threat intel on all of their employees to see if they've got compromised passwords
constantly? No one,
right?
No one, no government. Not even governments do that.
No. If you look at, if you think of it, even one of my downfalls, and this was budgetary, I think, and it's budgetary and execution, right? More than anything else is, how do you keep track of 5,000 people's usernames and passwords? Right. We used to do it by looking at system admins and then executives and people who had specific access. Those were the people who were really monitored on to see if anything ever landed in the dark web. But you can't do all employees, and on all it takes is one.
Yeah. Let's say you had a successful test. Let's say you did a dictionary attack, an internal dictionary attack to see what was going on. You're good. I have secure passwords. Yeah, that was a minute ago. Right. Someone has changed their password since then.
Right. Yeah. When you look at kind of some of the challenges organizations have in kind of adopting identity and really kind of defining it better, what's some of the challenges you've seen for practitioners, and what are some of the solutions you think? How do we really need to think about identity? So
there's a couple ways to look at this. One to consider is one you just mentioned is people often complain about budget. I don't have enough budget. I don't have the resources, people, or tools to be able to manage identities correctly.
Right.
And sometimes when they come to us and say, what solutions do you have for that? Well, first of all, there's no free solution, but better yet, what question are you asking? There's a presentation I've done. In fact, I've been doing it now for over 15 years called Take Your CFO to Lunch. It doesn't have to be literal, but it really boils down to, do you know what it takes for budget to be allocated and approved in your organization? If you don't, you're never going to get the budget you need, full stop. So let's start there. And that has nothing to do with identity or security. It's if you have a function to perform and you know what you truly need, not simply saying, oh, I want more budget, but if you truly know what you need, you should be able to justify that with some effort, but without difficulty. And that's the first thing I push back. Let's go back to management 101 before you even try to have a technical solution to identity issues. So you already mentioned some of it may be budgetary. So assuming we get past that, although I have a feeling, knowing you, we're going to come back to it at some point, in one way or another. But assuming you have that, then you have to get down to, okay, what type of identities do I have in my system? And I'll usually tell them, and you can use different terms for this, that you're going to have 3 different types of identities. You're going to have carbon-based identities, people you can identify, see, and depending on what your organization's like and what your HR policies are like, you can touch them, right? So you have carbon-based identities. You have silicon-based identities. I have a number of silicon-based identities in this device.
Right.
And it's not just your phone, it's the computer, it's your car. If your car is less than 10 years old, you have silicon-based identities in your car. Every webcam in your house, your doorbell, those are all silicon-based identities. And in between the two, you're also going to have our artificial identities, which are either created simply for a given environment or to link your carbon-based identity to your silicon-based identity. So 3 types of identities. You have those 3 categories. Map out where all those identities exist. And if that seems like a lot of work, go find another line of work, because that's what you need to do to make identity work. And if you're going to work in security, if you don't have your arms around identity, nothing else happens correctly. So you map all that out, and then you can start categorizing who should be where, which means in some cases you take people out of categories. That's going to help you a lot. The less you have to protect, the better you can protect it.
Well, I think this goes to one of the most difficult tasks you can ask an organization to do. Are you ready for it? User access reviews.
Who does those? That doesn't say once a year, yeah, I'll click yes and go on. Right?
How many times is that explained to the managers who you need to validate the access? How important it is to actually take an hour out of your day and review all your employees' access and make sure we're giving them the right access.
And we need to find a way to have that accountability in the manager's hands and head. Otherwise, in their minds, it's like, well, that's your job. You're the security guy.
Right. But they don't understand that as a security guy, you're only as good as the business giving you the information you need in order to enforce it, right? If the business gives too much access, you're not going to be the one to question it. And part of that is you don't question it is because if security is too tight and people can't do their job, then CISO and everyone in security is under a lot of duress as to why things aren't moving smoothly and why is security interfering with productivity and efficiency.
Yeah, you're costing us more. We can't do sales. Blah, blah. No, I've been doing this a long time. My most common title was Chief Security Officer, CSO, which I believe and often stands for Chief Scapegoat Officer in these cases, either because I can't get something done or look at what happened. Why didn't you stop this?
Either way, you were the guy that they were coming to and you go, well, you know, and this is one of the challenges is visibility, right? And visibility in the user access really relies on the business. And you know, one of the big things I often talk about, and one of the things I've exercised in my entire career as a practitioner, even today, is you have to have the business understand why these things are happening. Why I need you to pay attention to user access, why it's important that people don't have more access than they need, why it's important that different departments, as they add more technology, that they involve security in early. right? And that goes into relationship, that goes into accountability, that goes into, doing a good RACI chart with the business. One of the things I did early on in one of my roles was I built a RACI chart for every line of business.
Mhm.
And I took it to every single business leader, and not on our first meeting, but our second meeting, right? First meeting was lunch, getting to know each other, goals, kind of building that. The second one was I go, hey, based on our meeting, I built this RACI chart. Do you mind taking this with your managers and reviewing it and letting me know what you think about it? Most of the time, they never pushed back on it, but then that gave them that accountability, and that accountability was noted, meaning it had a record of that accountability. And then a lot of times as a CISO and as a security practitioner, you got to do a CYA, cover your ass type of deal. And that was one of mine.
Well, certainly that's a successful approach, as you've demonstrated. And I like the approach because what you're saying is that your first meeting is, let me find out what your needs are. And then the next thing you did, whether you're calling it that or not, is you made security and identity part of the business.
Right.
Too often I hear a CISO or an identity person say, well, the business wants this. Or here's a phrase for you, and tell me what you believe most people mean when they say it. Oh, that was a business decision. What do most people mean really when they say that?
Yeah. It wasn't my choice. Someone else made the call.
Exactly. I disagreed with it. Really. So tell me which decision you made that wasn't a business decision. I dare you.
Well, security is a business decision. That's the problem, right? That's the colossal shift that needs to happen today. 10 years ago, you and I, if we did this podcast 10 years ago, right? We're end of 2023, right? So let's go to end of 2013, right? It was a different world, right? It was a completely different. If you and I had this conversation, people would be like, no, you're still kind of IT. You're not really business driven. If you are, you're only business driven in a handful of places that are really, really large. Otherwise, everywhere else, go and just make sure, there's passwords are safe and no one's using password as a password, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as a password. And the firewall is configured correctly.
Yeah, secure the network. That's what they wanted you to do. Secure the network.
Secure the network. But no one was looking at securing the business. Today, if you still have that conversation, there's either a significant lack of maturity in your organization, and it's on you. It's on you as the security practitioner to go to places like the IDSA or ISAC or ISAC or any the other or nonprofits that are out there, and get all the tools to educate and bring your business up to where security should be. And if you don't do that, then I think you stand to face a very challenging time as a practitioner.
Yeah, your successor will be more successful than you.
If there is a successor in some of those cases.
It's funny you say that. I've had some positions that I've had where a situation occurred. I think, as we agreed earlier, I'm not perfect. My career hasn't been perfect. One reason or another, when I left, the decision was we're eliminating that department. And those of us that were in it before, as an aside, would take bets to see how long it was before it was recreated. I've never seen it go longer than 18 months.
Yeah, I've never been on that end of I've never been at that end. I've had peers be there, right, where they were a 3-man team, and what they've done is they've eliminated the leadership. They've given it to someone who was intentionally, by the way, creating challenges for the security practitioner, and that person was able to essentially sell themselves as being the person who can do X and Y, right, and own security. And then a year later, you see them in a ransomware alert somewhere, or in a data breach somewhere, and you go,
yeah, or
their system later, and a month later they're hiring a CISO.
Exactly, replacing that person who is now no longer there, and the whole thing just starts over again. And not much ground was gained, and that's really the sad story of the security industry. Business hasn't in general learned from a lot of those mistakes. What it takes for businesses to feel like they've learned something and want to progress is either a fine or a huge reputation hit, although those are really not as significant as we'd like to make them out to be, if you think about it.
We're so focused on internal identity, right? Our employees and their access, that we forget about our customers. And you and I come from a financial services background. You and I both know that the way to win the hearts and minds of people in the business is to own the customer identity part of the house, from design to build to integration to maintenance. Own it all. Own it all. The reason you want to own it all. Don't be the guy who owns the design but nothing else. Don't be the guy who does implementation and nothing else. Own it all. Yes, you're taking on a lot of responsibility, but guess what? That's how you forge relationships with the product team, with the business team, with the CFO, with the CEO, with the board, with fraud, with compliance, with legal. And now all of a sudden you're crossing all of those different entities in the business. You're building those relationships. And because you're owning it, what you get to do on the customer side, you get to even enhance more on the internal side. You get to bring your seat to the table and you get to earn it, because now you're being a business driver. And in financial services or e-commerce, in the places where stolen identity on the customer side costs the company money, you reduce that by any significant percentage. You let the CFO go, by the way, since we've transferred, when they're at a board meeting, seen it happen, since we've transferred identity to the security team rather than the product team, we've reduced fraud by 22%. Just saved us, $20 million.
And the product team can now focus only on product.
And the product team's happy about it.
Yes.
But now you're also, as a security person, now you've got visibility into everything the business is doing, because you've got your identity team sitting with the product team, and you've got your SOC team now fully integrated onto the customer side. And now you're really working with your NOC, and you're really working with your fraud team and your legal team and so forth. And you're really owning it. And identity is such a critical piece to the business that any failure of security to own it from end to end is just a missed opportunity of colossal. It's the person who took the bet on the Patriots winning the Super Bowl against the Falcons at halftime when it was 28.
Well, you can look at the odds and you can say, but look at every prospectus if you're going to invest. Past performance does not indicate future performance.
It doesn't, but would you gamble against Tom Brady? That's the question, but we're not going to get into that today.
So accept that. And I was a physics major, okay? Betting against Tom Brady at one point in time is different than betting against Tom Brady at another point in time.
Yep. But that was that point in time. But that goes to the identity aspect, right? Own it, all of it. Own it. And understand that responsibility, but you're going to go and you're going to get the budget to own it from A to Z. You're going to be able to go and get a security architect that identifies and understands identity. You're going to be able to go and find the right partners, and I had great identity partners in my last few roles, great identity partners that were just part of our company. They're security, they're sales engineers, they're architects. They were part of our kind of building out our entire identity infrastructure. And that's so important.
It's because smart people get it. You don't have to be an identity expert to get the fact that without identity, the keystone for everything about your infrastructure either works or falls apart.
So talk to me a little bit in the time we have left, Jeff. How does IDSA and kind of how do your work, how do you help practitioners really elevate identity? And what are some of the best practices you can share with people from what you've seen, 5 decades worth of experience leading this nonprofit? Now you're doing amazing work to help elevate a topic that I think is top of mind and critical for everyone. So what should we be taking away?
A few things. I'm not going to try to cover 50 years of experience necessarily. There's a book in there somewhere, but let's focus on IDSA. IDSA has been around for about 5 years. I joined early at the beginning of 2023. The founding executive director decided to retire. Was recruited in and did a great job. I'm now happy to take this on, and we're working on expanding a bit more as well. But specifically, as far as membership, specifically some of the takeaways that occur every year, we do a research survey using a third party that can go get a cohort of about organizations that have 1,000 or more people, because even though identity is important to everyone, it really, you can only get good takeaways from scale to a degree. We get respondents anywhere from security architects up through CEOs, and we do crosstabs, and we can say, what sort of role or title says what. But in that research, and I won't go through all of it here, and you can download that for free from our website, by the way. And we publish a new one every spring. You can see what's been going on, such as how many identity breaches have you had in the past year? Did any of these identity breaches have an effect on you? The reason that information is important is twofold. One, we're looking at trends. The number of breaches is certainly going up, even though we have better tools and people are more aware, but the number of breaches are going up because the bad guys have more tools and more power available to them as well. And you're looking at what sort of impact does it have. The reason that information, the second reason that's so important is when you want to go to your management and say, hey, here's a reason, yet another reason why identity is so important. Here is, independent survey information that says, here's the sort of effect it has on your company. Is that what we want? Let's get in front of that. So there's other things in there as well, such as using MFA and all the other things that are associated with identity. So I recommend go to idsalliance.org and download the report. You'll also see some blogs there, and we actually have working groups as well, and one of the working groups focuses on best practices. So you can go into there and either see blogs or papers that produced by that working group that says, here's the best practices to map what you're doing against the current NIST standards, as an example, or ISO standards, if you're not necessarily focused on US only. We also have a working group on AI. We mentioned silicon-based identity and artificial identities. AI can generate its own identities. AI can duplicate your identity to a point where it's going to be hard to tell. So you want to see what best practices are out there. What should we be looking at to use, and what sort of things should we not be doing yet? Because AI could potentially get ahead of where our capabilities are, and that's a fact for many organizations. I'm not anti-AI by any means, but you need to know, don't get in front of your skis because it'll bite you. You're also, we have membership meetings, we have webinars, as I said, a lot of our vendors, and they're not product pitches. In fact, it's a requirement that we stay vendor neutral. So if a vendor is giving a webinar, it's about thought leadership and best practices around certain types of, whether it's customer information or internal identities, or what you're doing for zero trust. If you're familiar at all with zero trust, which is a very popular buzzword, and a lot of people don't really know what they mean when they're saying that, is that you're only giving access to only those people that need access to anything only at a given point in time, after which that expires. So, when someone asks me to define zero trust, the definition I use, and I happen to know John Kindervag, the father of zero trust, he won't agree with this, but zero trust to me means no memory.
Right.
Yep. You identify, here's who you say you are, you confirm you are, yes, you have this access, you can do that. And then poof, the memory goes away. You want to do it again, you have to go through the whole process again. So what was the first thing though?
Kind of like 50 First Dates. For those that haven't seen the movie.
Yep, exactly. So it's it all starts with identity. And you can find all of that information, how to do it, and where to go for more information through IDSA. I know it sounds like I'm doing a hard sell sales pitch for you, but this is the reason I'm involved in it, because I really think it's the right thing to do.
It's not. There's a lot of really important stuff on the nonprofit side and security that's really critical for practitioners who if you don't speak about it, they don't know it exists, and they think they have to reinvent it or invent it themselves. And you don't have to, because really there's a lot of hardworking practitioners that have put their thoughts on a papers, in a podcast, in a blogs, into webinars, and all you have to do is just take the time to go do it. And by the way, and I know you're not a I'm a big AI fan, right? I've adopted a lot more AI because it's made my life much easier in specific parts of my life, but that's one of them. Take a webinar, download it, upload it to upload it to Chat GPT. Say, give me a 500 word piece on this webinar and what it actually is, and it does just that. Take a YouTube link, go to Chat GPT, say, give me a summary of this video, and it'll give you a robust summary of the video. You can read it and walk away with it and go, all right, I want to see that part of it and then you can go back and watch those 5 minutes that really mean something to you, that kind of fills that knowledge gap. There's something to be said about using AI efficiently in order to maximize your knowledge base while limiting the amount of time you invest doing something so that you're getting really what you want.
I'm glad you said those two things, because what AI isn't doing right now and shouldn't do is saying giving you less work. In fact, all AI should be able to do is save you some time and maybe point you to the right resources, but it should never do your work for you, at least not right now.
No, it should give you. I wouldn't trust a computer to do my work for me ever, but I would say give me a summary of something. Because if the summary doesn't make sense, then you can obviously question it, right? You can go about giving it a different prompt. You can go about doing it very differently. You can, send it to someone who's actually done it. And I've done this before, right? I've reached out to someone on LinkedIn who I just saw their webinar, and I go, hey, this is a summary of the webinar. Do you think how accurate do you think this is to what, you just did in your webinar? And they'll go 100%, or it's missing this one key point. And now you've really achieved, what you're looking for in order to fill it. But don't let AI do your work for you. Don't let AI think for you. Let AI fill gaps of knowledge that will help you be a more effective thinker and executor and a keeper of a security program in your organization.
I'm glad you use that term. You're a keeper of the security program, because that is, you are the custodian of the security program when you're a CISO or equivalent. And that has to be an integral part of the business. It is no longer part of IT or even IT only, and it's no longer separate from the business, even though a lot of people still use that terminology. When you're not part of the business, you're not part of the business.
Yeah, you're as long as you keep playing with networking and firewall settings and EDR and MDR, you're missing security. And the frustration, unfortunately, and I'm going to say this, and some people may have their feelings hurt, but I'm sorry, but you tune in because I always speak truth. Always. Here's the truth. If you can't get the message across, there are organizations that will help you get the message across and win buy-in. If you don't try, that falls squarely on your shoulders.
Exactly.
Squarely on your shoulders. You have to continuously try. Tried one way, it didn't work, try another way. Reach out to Jeff and go, how do I do it? Jeff couldn't get you, reach out to Clint Maples. Great guy, right? Reach out to Clint. Clint will help you do it. Can't get to Clint, reach out to Gary Hayslip. He'll help you do it. Go to Chris Roberts. There's so many people with years of experience who are happy to share it. Happy to share it. All you have to do is just send them a message and go, I'm striking out here. What am I doing wrong?
One of my mentors early on, Bill Murray, not the comedian, he retired in 2000. He is still giving security advice to anyone that asks. When you're in this industry, you're in this industry for life.
Yeah, you're part of the community forever. You can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, thank you so much. I know we're 5 minutes over our allotted time, but there's just so much stuff to talk about here when it comes to identity. I'd love to have you back on early next year again, and we can kind of see where security stands 6 months from now, November. Let's plan to have you back on around April, May, and see how identities improved in 6 months. Is there measurable progress?
I think there will be. And since you mentioned April, there's one last thing I want to leave with everyone. In addition to everything we offer, we have an annual conference. It's an online conference. It's Identity Management Day. It's the second Tuesday of April every year. So next year it'll be April 9th. This past year, 2023, we had 1,100 attendees. We had 32 sessions, 32 presenters, 16 unique sessions during the day. We had just like an in-person conference. You had a card. It was an online card. When you go to a vendor's booth, they'll click it for you. You can see videos, download some of their documents, interact with them online or in video. And then we had drawings for prizes at the end of the day. It was a fun time where a lot of people learned a lot about identity they didn't know before. So let's plan to talk around then, and we can either go right before Identity Management Day and get everyone ready for it, or right after, and I can tell you how much of a success it was.
I'm impressed that you said April 9th. We'll be in Israel for CyberTech, which is which because of the war in Israel was moved from January to April 8th through the 11th. So I'd love to have it on and still promote it beforehand.
That would be great.
I won't be able to attend, which is a very, very sad.
But we do record all the sessions, so you can look at all of them after.
In fact, love it. Perfect. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Do you want to share the domain for IDSA?
Sure. It's idsalliance.org.
Go check that out, y'all. Thanks you to Jeff, and thanks to everyone else for tuning in today. We really appreciate y'all. Have a great rest of your day. Stay cyber safe, and most importantly, have a great weekend, y'all.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.